And joining us now to discuss the issue further is Juliet Bourke, Human Capital Partner at Deloitte, and also Emma Walsh, Founder and Managing Director of Parents at Work. Thanks so much for joining us today, ladies. Let's kick it off with Juliet. Juliet, just want to start with basically carers returning from parental leave have had a right to request flexibility in the workplace since 2010. The policy being named as some and criticised as a toothless tiger. Has it had an impact?
If you look at the statistics in relation to the percentage of people working part-time over the last 10 years, in fact it's remained static. So for women it was 42.9% more than 10 years ago, now it's 43%. A slight increase for men, 2%, but over 10 years no substantial impact. So you'd have to say questionable, with one exception. I think that we've seen a different conversation coming out. We've seen some indicators, for example, from the CEO, David Thodey of Telstra, from Mike Smith, CEO of ANZ, saying all roles flexible. And so we're seeing movement from leaders themselves saying flexibility is a really important issue. Now, whether that's translating down to people on the shop front is up for debate, but there's a new conversation.
Emma, do you agree with the ACTU that it needs to be strengthened, these rules need to be strengthened?
Actually, I do. I agree. I think the reality is there is no legislation requiring organisations, for example, to have a flexible work policy. It's really up to the organisation to decide whether at all it has an approach to flexibility. Obviously, yes, the intention behind the right to request is a good one, but the reality is if there isn't an onus on the organisation or the employer to really come back with some really good reasons as to why it's not going to work and put forward an alternative around how it could work, then I really think that it's a one-way show, really just up to the employee to try and manipulate some kind of exciting or opportunity that might be worthwhile to the employer. And really all the work stays with the mother or the father that's trying to negotiate the flexibility, and really it's up to the manager or the organisation to go, yeah, I was convinced by that, or no, I wasn't, so no, we're not going to approve that, or yes, we will. And really, it's a bit of luck as to how that then progresses from there on.
Exactly, quite a grey area. So, yes. Juliet, in terms of what Kate Carnell was saying about it, she said she alluded to the fact that changes could actually backfire and sort of lead people to not want to hire women in the first place. What's your sort of view on that?
Look, that is always trotted out when there has been a change. We've had this kind of legislation in place in the UK since 2003. So first of all in relation to women of young children or women of children with a disability. It was extended in 2008, again in 2010, and now in 2014 every employee who's been employed more than 6 months in the UK has a right to request flexibility, not for reasons of carers' responsibility or children, but just because they want to. And it's been really well received, and we haven't seen a diminution in the number of women employed or indeed in any segment of the population. Very interesting.
Do you have something to say on that?
Yeah, I agree. Look, I think there is an awful lot of fear that if we allow people to just have the right to choose any flexible work arrangement, that they're going to put in place some unworkable option for an employer. And the reality is, for any good, genuine working partnership, working relationship, it's got to be work. It's got to work for both the employer and the employee. I don't know many, and I speak to many women in particular who are negotiating flexibility, that put forward something that's going to be unworkable for the organisation as well as themselves, because at the end of the day they're the ones having to do the job and they're going to need to get it done in the time frames that's going to be required, so they don't want to set themselves up to fail either.
Some controversial comments this week, Juliet, from a senior Austereo executive reported in Mumbrella that she was giving out contraception in the workplace, saying that part-time work was idealistic and anti-commercial. Quite controversial. What was your view on that?
Yes, controversial. It'll be interesting to understand the context for those comments, because in isolation they seem quite remarkable in 2015. Part-time work, it's not just about part-time work. Any form of flexibility is actually critical in this day and age. And the Productivity Commission itself said we need to be advancing flexibility into the future. So quite retrograde comments, and certainly not in step with a modern workforce.
No, Emma, what would you say to that?
Totally agree, and really interesting just hearing Joe Hockey's Treasurer's speech that he made today in Brisbane, and he did actually say that as a government they need to lead and facilitate change in the childcare space, in the flexible workplace, place, and did very much link productivity for the fact that we need much more flexibility in the workplace. So I think that's definitely where modern thinking is. I don't think there's a place for that kind of rhetoric in the workplace anymore.
Juliet, in terms of a British survey, it actually said attitudes towards flexibility in the workplace, which we look at obviously quite closely. It reported that 50% of respondents believe that those who work flexibly are actually resented by other colleagues who don't work as flexibly. Is this something that you see? I mean, in terms of just attitudes towards flexibility in the workplace?
Look, I think probably 50% is a bit too high, but I think, yes, when it becomes an issue for a marginalised population, and that is why the UK legislation is so important, because it says everyone wants flexibility. This is not just an issue for women with children. We all want to balance our work and our life. And when we do that and we recognise this as a group activity, then it diminishes resentment, because it's not one person getting an advantage and one person perceiving they've received a disadvantage. So mainstreaming flexibility is actually the way to reverse resentment. Well,
that's the thing, Emma, right? It's got to become the norm for people to accept it.
Absolutely. I would really like to see the debate move away from, part-time mummy versus mean employer. Won't give me flexibility, because I think that's ridiculous now. I think most people are looking for a degree of flexibility in their work. Certainly there's a lot of evidence to suggest, and lots of different surveys that have gone out to suggest that lots more people want flexibility, as Juliet was saying.
And it's not just mums, it's also other people who might be carers or have other sort of responsibilities outside of work.
Absolutely. And look, the reality is that so many of the roles that we go to every day have an element of flexibility in them. And I think partly the issue is actually defining flexibility. I think it's one of those, unfortunately, slightly controversial words, where it means different things to different people. And unless we are better at opening up our minds to, what does flexibility mean to you, what does it mean to me, and how can we make this work, then, unfortunately, we're going to battle on some stereotyping that's unfortunate.
Teamwork is something that can obviously suffer, according to some people, with flexibility. Juliet, do you have a view on that in terms of the impact on teamwork in a business, in a team?
It's interesting. I'm not sure that I do agree that teamwork suffers. I think that teamwork is about everyone working together, and part of that working together is different personalities, different ways of working, and different flexibility. So a leader's role is to bring all of those elements together. You can actually get expanded hours of operation with flexibility, because some people want to work early in the morning and some later in the afternoon. So actually it can be a huge benefit. There's a reduction in absenteeism, a reduction in turnover. Turnover itself is very detrimental to team cohesion. So all of the studies across the world put real positives against flexibility and productivity.
Job sharing in itself probably, Emma, is a form of teamwork.
Yes, I agree. And it's interesting, I feel like I can really talk on both sides of this debate. I'm a mum, obviously, and I've been a part-time CEO for 8 years now, and I employ up to 15 people in my business, and we all work flexibly. There's not one person actually in our business that works full-time, so we've had to get good at this. And I've got to say that because we have a really flexible approach and attitude, people come together to make that work. And
is it women and men in your workplace?
Yes, there is. And I think there's just a great camaraderie of everyone wants to make this work, and as a result I've seen us be able to launch new and creative ways of doing things, and really, I think, embrace world of work.
Do you think, though, that has to start at the top? Because obviously, you embrace it, so if the leader embraces it, it obviously helps the rest of the workforce to embrace it as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think, though, that, as I said, everyone brings an attitude around flexibility and what does it mean. And certainly with my team, we've had to have a conversation about what does that look like for everyone, and how do we make that work for all of us. And when one feels that they're not getting their needs met, we have that conversation. And it's pretty regular. And keeping that conversation open, as I said, is part of the way to make this work.
Juliet, how can small and medium businesses create a flexible or family-friendly environment? Often it's the small and medium businesses that find it the toughest.
Well, I don't know that I actually agree with that. And Emma's a great example of a small business in which she's made it work. So I think it's actually about the leader in any business, the leader of a small team, a leader of a large organisation. It is about opening up that conversation and basically seeing how things can work together. We have a great tool that we use in Deloitte called Small Things, Big Difference. And at the beginning of every project engagement, we ask every single team member, it's not about caring responsibilities, what are the small things that we can do that will make a big difference to your lives? Because we want people to be energised, we want to sustain them, we want everyone to be fully engaged. So the leader owning that conversation and facilitating it between the groups. So it's a win-win for everyone. Small things, big difference, my tip.
Very topical with the intergenerational report out this week. We have to leave it there. Emma Walsh, founder and managing director of Parents at Work, thanks so much for joining us, and Juliet Bourke, human capital partner at Deloitte.